The new dungeon is a great experience from the Bungie dungeon team, and I love it. However, there is something about it driving me truly crazy and holding me back from giving it an S tier rating, and we're gonna talk about all of it today, the good and the bad, in my opinion, of Warlord's Ruin. Or maybe I should say Warlord's Ruin. Just ribbing my lovely editor. We put together our dungeon guide right after I finished on Friday, and we had to re-export due to a typo. Let's have fun with it though. Include the word #Warlord in the comment section with whatever you comment and like today's video, and I will reply to one of you in the comment section on my account, no other account, to win a rare Draconis Tetrachroma emblem. Love you, Maggie, you the best. Okay, new dungeon talk. Dying to know if the thing I'm hung up on is also what you may be hung up on. Let's start with one thing I really liked. The visuals and settings of this dungeon are chef's kiss, maybe my favorite part of the activity. We're in a dungeon that looks like a dungeon. I'm a big D&D nerd, shocker, and I loved how I immediately felt like we were doing a big dungeon crawl type thing. No surprise that I loved the little Easter egg that Bungie threw in at the beginning of the dungeon, where all three of the traditional classes were kind of frozen to death up in the mountains. Loved it. The huge frozen mountains giving me those Lord of the Rings vibes, and then you got the Dark Souls vibes with the stone and the iron and the freaking fire and the death traps lurking around every corner, keeping me on my toes. Outstanding. I was a little bummed that in terms of enemy variety, there wasn't really any new particular stuff thrown into the mix, just a bunch of scorned and taken. I know that's probably a lot to ask for something like a dungeon. I get it, just putting the vibe out there. I did, however, like the alternate visual style on the big bad boss. Love how people are already calling this thing the meatball, like the old Gambit Primeval of similar design. Good nicknames stick, apparently. Encounter-wise, I was worried when the very first encounter was a boss fight that would mean it would be one of two, and the first one just happened really early. But 3 boss fights total, IMO, is a good call. And don't get me wrong, there are non-boss fight dungeon encounters that I've really enjoyed, and non-boss fight dungeon encounters that I've absolutely hated. An example of a non-boss fight encounter I think was really interesting was the cube room encounter in the Prophecy dungeon. Just a really wacky encounter that kept me on my toes. It was hectic and very challenging solo. And yeah, there were 2 tough enemies at the very end, but not really a boss fight encounter. On the other hand, an example of a non-boss fight encounter that made me want to pull my freaking hair out is the underwater jumping puzzle section of the Ghost of the Deep dungeon. That was just an absolute slog of an encounter, a trial of mental endurance more than anything else, I would say. But yeah, 3 boss fights instead of 2, thumbs up from me, even if the first boss is basically an absolute joke when you figure out how the mechanics work. I did think it was kind of funny watching back some Twitch VODs of my fellow streamer brethren doing their first run of the dungeon, how we all had the same thought when the lantern showed up. Oh, here's a thing that has a blight in it. We gotta shoot it to make it go away. Turns out, no, you don't. And a lot of us didn't figure that out until at least encounter 2. Just stand near it, but we've been conditioned for years in this game to shoot things. Wondered if any Bungie devs were watching people stream the first encounter and just chuckling or yelling to themselves, watching us all do the mechanic wrong, but still succeeding anyway. Loved the little mechanic of getting put up in the iron stripper cage in encounter 1. Although I really truly wish I could rewind time and put a new note in my day 1 dungeon guide. In that guide, I mentioned it's best to shoot your teammates out of their cage before freeing yourself. After farming that encounter so many times now, it really isn't the best way, like at all. It is 200% better to free yourself first. Literally just spin around and find and shoot the lowest hanging taken eye first, then the next highest one, then the highest one. You will free yourself in seconds every time if you do that method. Every time I see people die in the cage, it's because they started shooting the highest taken eye first, and the cage rises, so the lowest taken eye becomes harder and harder to see. So don't do that. Just start with the lowest eye first and you'll be fine. But anyway, there's a really weird thing I've seen happen a bunch in the first encounter that I didn't like, where the boss Rathel will only drop 1 Scorn Lantern, not 2. Unless there's something I'm totally missing, it seems to be purely RNG based and it only happens maybe 1 in 5 or 6 times. But considering the lanterns determine the length of your DPS phase, kind of a big thorn in my ass. Not really sure what's going on there, but admittedly that complaint is kind of smallish potatoes. But if it is an RNG thing, Bungie, maybe we could look into that. That would be great. Thanks so much. Moving right along. The jail encounter I loved so much for the sheer head-scratching factor the first time you get put in that room. If you're watching my video today and haven't done this encounter yet, I beg you to skip ahead to later in the video. I really wish that the ability to DM homies on Discord, Twitter, whatever, just didn't exist for this encounter, just to see how long some teams really would have taken to solve the puzzle. For the record, if you did this encounter completely blind and refused any outside help from friends or anyone else until y'all figured it out, I have so much respect for you. Not that it matters or that you care, but yeah, just putting that vibe out there. Really interesting encounter. It was also nothing short of a pure delight opening Twitch and watching the mental hamster wheel turn for other people trying to figure out that encounter when you yourself know already how the puzzle works. After I finished putting up my day 1 guide, I watched Dado, Jez, and Danielle do this encounter live when Dado knew what to do and Jez and Danielle didn't. Gonna go ahead and highly recommend watching that VOD. Real laugh riot. The unavoidable, inescapable downside of the jail encounter is that it truly is just a one and done experience. Meaning when you know how the mechanics work, you can open the door in like 7 seconds. The joy is forever lost after the first experience, but there's nothing really you can do about that, just the way things work. With that in mind, if you take someone through the dungeon who doesn't know how the jail encounter works, I'm begging you, let them try and figure it out blind, at least for a few minutes. See how far they can get. Feel their excruciating pain at not knowing what to do, and then experience their moment of glorious triumph when they finally figure it out and open the door. It'll be like watching prehistoric man discover fire. Moving on, it wouldn't be a dungeon without jumping puzzles, and again, a mixture of beautiful scenery and, hey, at least it's not Ghost of the Deep air bubble vibes, make this one pretty good. Watching first-timers fall off cliffs with collapsing snow and opening up total jabate chests to get dive bombed by screebs is something that will bring me forever joy. If you are Sherpaing any first-time players through this dungeon, it is your right, nay, your duty to make sure that you watch them fall for all the pitfalls and traps of this dungeon at least one time. It's half the fun, and no, I'm not being mean or trying to torture new players. Anyone with a good sense of humor should legit laugh the first time they open a bait chest and get completely wagon circled by the Scorn. For real, please do it and record clips and send them to me. I swear to God, it's good, wholesome, clean fun, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. The second encounter was much more engaging than the first, and I really enjoyed it a lot. For whatever reason, it took me a hot minute to notice the torches at the front wall where you spawned in, so for a while we were making the encounter kinda harder than it needed to be. If I had one complaint for this encounter, it would be that if you damage the big Scorn baddies too quickly, they only drop 1 lantern instead of 2. What you gotta do is you gotta damage them a little bit, you gotta wait for them to drop a lantern, then you kill them for their body to drop the second lantern. If anyone from Bungie is listening, I really don't like the idea of punishing the players for being too good with their damage. Kinda like, whoops, oh, you went too ham with the damage there, eh, kid? Well, only 1 lantern for you. That'll learn you Salta Greppo looking mother. But then again, we as Guardians are really powerful these days, so Bungie probably trying to think of creative ways to get us to slow down whenever possible. And speaking of us being too powerful, whoever at Bungie came up with the idea of ogre projectile beams being able to physically push Guardians back has probably been given multiple raises at this point, as it continues to be maybe the biggest threat that boss has in their bag of tricks. I'd like to say it's starting to really get on my nerves, but then again, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't get great leopard clips like this.
Travis, drag.
Yeah! Hate to see it happen, Leps Evans in the chat. I did enjoy the fact that if teams aren't organized in boss fight number 2, that they could end up burning multiple torches at the same time and cutting their damage phases short. Keeps the player on their toes and makes the fight a little bit more challenging than encounter 1. The final boss fight was chaotic AF. The Taken and the Blight pools, they just don't stop spawning in, and I sorta like the non-stop energy of that fight. That being said, if there were ever a moment where I really wished you could shoot the Scorn Lanterns away quickly instead of just standing near them for a set amount of time, it would definitely be this encounter. Those immune Scorn that you have to melee the debuff onto, brutal pairing with those time-gated lanterns, by the way. The idea in general of a immune Scorn that you have to tag a debuff onto and then play keep away from, that is kind of funny though. But again, wish I could shoot the lanterns away because it would reward players who can deal good damage quickly up close rather than forcing people to play a game of defensive heal nade, barricade, milk the clock, keep away. One thing that was kind of funny, when my team beat the dungeon for the first time, we truly had no idea that you could have an extremely long damage phase up at the very top of the mountain with the 3 platforms. Don't know if this happened to anyone else, but we were all running around like chickens with our heads cut off because of the Taken eyes, accidentally burned all the platforms by mistake, got teleported back down, and just wound up killing the boss before getting all the way back up to the top again. I'll say one thing for sure, the boss fight of Warlord's Ruin is a cakewalk compared to the boss fight of Ghosts of the Deep, which, to be honest, I kinda have mixed feelings on. The elitist content creator on my left shoulder probably wanted a bigger challenge on the final fight of the dungeon boss for the sole reason that this may actually be the last ever dungeon in D2, and I wanted it to go out with a big bang of a fight. It may not be the last dungeon, I don't know. I feel like dungeons are pretty successful in D2, and as long as D2 is alive and getting more content, we may get more. Again, I don't know. Remember, after the final shape, we're getting episode content, and I don't know what else. It's really looking kind of vague. So technically, Warlord's Ruin is the last announced dungeon that we know of, and this boss fight did feel pretty tame compared to Ghosts, which is a slight feels bad. On the other hand, the kind, gentle, soft-spoken, true Vanguard sitting on my right shoulder is telling me it's probably for the best, and the more I think about it, yeah, he's probably right. While I actually did enjoy the challenge of Ghosts of the Deep, the boss fight was just a borderline exhausting experience. I'd imagine that the boss fight in Warlord's Ruin will be a far, far more enjoyable experience for the average player. And if that means word gets around that more people really loved this dungeon and recommend new players check it out, I think that bodes well for the community overall. Dungeons, and especially raids, are some of my favorite content in the game, and it kills me when I hear people tell me they've never touched a dungeon or never touched a raid because they're worried it'll be too hard or not approachable or whatever. Between the visuals, the traps, the vibe, the fun factor, and the overall degree of difficulty, this really is a perfect for fun dungeon for newish players, and if you've never done a dungeon before, this one is a hard recommend from me. Okay, enough beating around the bush. Let's give the people what they clicked for. Out of everything this dungeon does so well, for all the charm and the warm fuzzies it's given the player base, why, oh why, is the loot so mid? This hurts me deep in my soul. If we'd gotten some fire drops out here, this would be a 10 out of 10 dungeon for yours truly. But man, I am truly digging out here for roles that I actually want to keep. Admittedly, there are some diamonds in the rough. For example, the rocket sidearm so far is very fun. I mean, I don't know if I would call it top tier, need to spend more time fiddling with it. Gotta roll with Volt Shot, I'm quite fond of. Also haven't touched it in PvP yet. That's on my to-do list this week, including solo flawless this bad boy. And I will confess the design on the dungeon exotic alone is sending me from 6 to midnight if you're picking up what I'm laying down. But yeah, outside of that, not a ton. One thing in particular that's sending me extra hard. What in the ever-loving is this origin trait? And look, I get it. Not every new weapon in the game can be Omega God tier, because then power creep would be an even bigger problem in D2 than it already is right now. But this origin trait seems so niche, it's insane. At least if you had something fun as hell like wild card on the table, players would probably care about going into the dungeon for more than just the fun vibes. But yeah, destroying vehicles and constructs? I guess if you were one of the 12 people who wrote Bungie a strongly worded letter about how you're not rewarded enough for shooting a Bleak Watcher turret with a bow in PvP, good news, your time has finally come. For everybody else, though, this sundering is to other origin traits what the Halo show is to other shows. However, with all that in mind, I'm still planning on putting up a loot farming guide on the dungeon tomorrow because A, I think, like me, a lot of people want to fiddle with the new pocket rocket sidearm, which again is kind of fun. Also, B, it's a dummy easy way to get a ton of wish engrams and layer keys, like stupid easy. Oh, and C, there are some unique perks people may want to tinker with, like Slice, which I like. So yeah, look for that video tomorrow. But for everyone out there who doesn't care about sidearms or some unique roles, this dungeon will probably be I had my fun, I loved it, I'm gonna get the exotic, then I'm out type situation. And again, it really breaks my heart because almost every other part of Warlord's Ruin was so enjoyable. And a slightly similar complaint I have is the armor. I mean, looking at the dungeon armor, it's not that bad. It does fit the snowy mountaintop vibe for sure, but holy Christ, on an everything whole wheat bagel, it is a crime that the Witcher themed paid armor isn't what we got in this dungeon, because it fits the vibe so much better. This is a dungeon, a castle, a keep. The theme is dungeon crawling and dragon slaying. And yeah, there's some mountain climbing too, but come on. Wouldn't some medieval knight in shining armor vibes even be better than the mountain climbing stuff? I mean, I guess then it would probably be too close in style to the Witcher armor, and then people wouldn't bother with buying the Witcher armor. But God, it's the equivalent of watching someone cut pizza with a knife and fork. Like, I know it's not really a big deal at the end of the day, but I'm like twisting inside thinking about it. Moving on. All in all, if this is the last dungeon we ever get in D2, I could be happy with that. Don't get me wrong, I love really hard, challenging dungeons too, but I think it's nice that one of the last ones we get, if not the last dungeon, is one that the majority of players can and probably will enjoy. But having said that, Bungie, please, I'm begging you, come June 2024, let the witness kick my goddamn teeth in on day one. For real, pretend I forgot the safe word. Make it like that. I want that final raid dialed up to 12. Let me know your opinions down in the comment section, and again, I'll pick one of you with the comment #Warlord for that Draconis emblem. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.